Welcome. Thank you to the Apprenticeship Employment Network for hosting the National Skills Week Industry Workshop. Never before has skills reform been more critical to our nation. Ensuring our workforce has the skills we need for the jobs of the future is critical for rebuilding our economy, especially in the post-COVID environment. Collaboration between government, industry and the community will be vital to the success of our recovery. And it goes without saying that the Morrison government is committed to supporting Australians to stay and work. However, we also need Australians better trained for the jobs needed. And to do that, we need real reform when it comes to skills training in Australia. So we have prioritised skills development as part of the JobMaker strategy, which is designed to set Australia up for the economic success over the next 3 to 5 years. Our multi-billion skills package provides a significant boost to the vet sector. This includes our supporting apprentices and trainees wage subsidy that is providing timely, targeted and scalable support to businesses to keep on their existing apprentices and trainees. This builds on the establishment of the National Careers Institute and the National Skills Commission. These two organisations are working together to strengthen, streamline and improve the delivery of and access to careers information in Australia. Again, I'd like to thank the Apprenticeship Employment Network for hosting this industry workshop, and I hope that you enjoyed today's session. Thanks.
Okay, so I think you can all see my screen now, so we'll kick off and as I said, happy to take questions as we go. Just a quick reminder of upcoming sessions we've got for the rest of the week. So tomorrow we've got Linda Wyatt, the Assistant Secretary for the Apprenticeships and Workforce Skills Division with the Commonwealth Department of Education, Skills and Employment. She'll give you an update on some of the things that the Commonwealth have been doing. I'm sure she'll touch on things like JobKeeper and the apprenticeship wage support programs. On Wednesday, we've got an update from the Australian Apprenticeship Training Information Services from Peter. And in the afternoon, we've got a youth mental health workshop with Gina Chinnery. And then on Thursday, we've got a workshop from the new National Careers Institute, the new Executive Director there, Tiffany Blight and Grant Lovelock. We've got an update on Thursday afternoon from Janet Nicholson from Worksite and changes to the awards. And on Friday, we've got a presentation from Professor John Buchanan and Dr. Lisa Folks on the impacts of COVID-19 and a way forward for the wider economy. To go to the next slide too easily. I'd also just like to take a quick opportunity to thank our sponsors. I know we're not running a live physical event this year, but without the support of these organisations, we wouldn't be able to run a lot of these events for you guys at the cost we normally can. And with this event being free, again, there's still a cost from an association's perspective, but a lot of these sponsors you see on the screen there have been long-time supporters of the association, and we thank them for their support. So with that, some of the topics I wanted to cover today, just to give you a quick update from a Commonwealth Government perspective and some of the things we're seeing more specifically from a GTO lens. Also from the Victorian Government, I know this morning you heard from Carl Walsh, but again, just a quick update and summary of that. We'd also like to share some of the stats we've seen from a COVID-19 perspective and other statistics. We'll give you a snapshot of the results of the GTO National Standards self-assessment that was completed for the 2019 year recently. And then also give you a quick update on the Victorian Manslaughter legislation, some OHS stats, and what we've got planned for the rest of the year. So look, I think I'd like to start the conversation today was, I think we're at a significant crossroads. There's quite a number of things that have been going on behind the scenes for the last 6 to 12 months now. And I think with COVID-19, I think some of those things are going to be accelerated and brought forward, and we may be using the excuse of COVID-19 to bring in some of these things as well. So I'd like to obviously see things built back better. But quite a number of reviews have gone on in the last 6 months around secondary schools, both at a state and a federal level. The ongoing review of TAFE and the vet system as a whole, and you can see even Prime Minister Scott Morrison's been picking up on quite a number of things, and certainly linking the vet sector back to a jobs recovery position. You would have also seen in the media a lot of noise about university funding and capped places, and even further changes have been sort of muted for university funding going forward. There's also been quite a number of reviews on career advice, and also quite a number of reviews on youth unemployment and the wide range of services that we have. We tend to segment quite a number of those services, and it's a difficult space to navigate around. And then I guess because of COVID-19, a couple of issues that have risen around, public service versus outsourcing. And I guess over the last 20 years, the government as a whole have been getting smaller at all levels, Commonwealth, state and local government, and we've been outsourcing more and more services. But does that create good, decent jobs back within our local communities? There's certainly some conversations happening around that. And then I guess where we're at right now with COVID-19, in Victoria, we're in stage 4, but the rest of the country have sort of handled the spiking viruses pretty well compared to us. And the government have spent a lot of money on short-term business preservation, but what does this look like for long-term job creation? And I think we're sort of in that conversation now where governments are starting to look at, okay, we've had JobKeeper, and that's been really well, a really good initiative there to support existing businesses and existing structures. But what does the next 12 to 18 months look like if we're looking at trying to rebuild the economy and get the 1 million people or so that are unemployed back into some sort of job creation program? And what does that actually look like on the ground? So again, I think the next few months are going to be really important for the association to make sure that we put forward some good examples of what the network can do, and really try and highlight and make sure that we keep group training in the front of ministers' minds as much as we possibly can. When we look at life before COVID-19, these are my words, I'm saying it wasn't that great. We have pockets of high youth unemployment. We've got, some reasonably large percentages of youth in certain areas that are on social welfare support. We've got poor perceived outcomes for TAFE and VET in general, and we've got declining participation. The usual thing that we do about that is we complain about the career advice young people are getting. And again, there's been reviews in that space. And we've been competing against an uncapped university funding model. So more and more young people are using that as their first choice post-secondary school. We've got problems with social housing and aged care and healthcare and childcare, which has probably been highlighted with COVID-19. Certainly in Victoria, those things have really been highlighted with we're probably not spending enough money or spending the money in the right spaces in those spaces. So look, I think from my perspective, one of the things that we think is going to be critical coming out of this is how do we start the conversation around job creation. We know we've got close to 1 million people that are officially unemployed. We've probably already got another 3 million people that are on JobKeeper at the moment. And what does that look like for those businesses and those individuals when we're coming off JobKeeper over the next 6 months? So there's quite a number of things that in those spaces that I've listed, we could really stimulate traineeship and apprenticeship programs to help that job creation piece. When we have a look at from a Commonwealth perspective, they've certainly done a really good job at that business preservation. I think the Commonwealth should be congratulated for what they've implemented over the past 5 months. These words were foreign to us before March, but job seeker, job keeper, job trainer, the expansion of the supporting apprentices trade and traineeship wage support program have all been really welcomed initiatives that have helped keep young people in jobs and keep businesses going. So again, that's cost the economy a lot of money, and I guess really now the conversation needs to be around, well, what does that look like over the next 6 to 12 months, that sort of job creation piece. When we look at some of the things that have just recently commenced from the 1st of July, we've now got a National Skills Commission office officially set up. And we've had a commissioner now for about 12 months, and we've also got the National Careers Institute. So the Commonwealth is certainly trying to position themselves in this space. And you would have heard Carl this morning, we've changed the COAG arrangements to a national skills agreement. And we've certainly got all the states and the Commonwealths talking about, well, what does this skills piece look like? There was a heads of agreement that was released by that new group in August just recently, and it's certainly seeking state support at the moment. And I think Linda will probably go into more detail about this tomorrow, but I have got a few slides that probably hints at where the Commonwealth wants to take the vet and skills space. So some of the objectives in the heads of agreement, I've sort of highlighted the key words there, but you can download this from the Commonwealth's website. They're certainly keen to get all the states to adopt a new funding model that has some sort of level of consistency. It integrates subsidies and loans, and there's some sort of efficient pricing that meets the skills and the needs by employers. They also want to develop and fund nationally accredited micro-credentials and individual skill sets. This is in addition to full qualifications and will support lifelong learning and people changing from one occupation strand to another. They want to provide stronger support for foundation skills. And I guess they've really acknowledged that there are some low levels of language literacy and numeracy and even digital literacy within the population. They want to promote apprenticeships and other employment-based training, including pre-apprenticeship programs, to try and, I guess, stimulate more local level economy and labour supply needs at a local level through those models, which is great. And they certainly want to strengthen vet pathways for secondary school students and improving the quality of the information and the quality of vetting school programs. The other thing that the heads of agreement want to achieve is obviously through the National Careers Institute, and we'll hear from Grant and Tiffany on Thursday, but have a central, I guess, suppository of information, career information, and helps young people make better decisions about what their future employment and learning pathways is going to be. They want to enhance the transparency and accountability between the states and data collection. Again, I think one of the things that's been highlighted in COVID-19 is the difficulty to get accurate information on what is happening on the ground right now is really being highlighted. And I know the Commonwealth and state governments have been really keen to get some of the statistics that we've been collecting on a weekly basis. But having a system that's in place that can do that consistently, and it's more accurate and up to date, we're not having to wait 6 months before we get this data, would be really, really achievable, hopefully. And then I guess the other thing around funding. So again, they're talking about public and private and not-for-profit providers and have some sort of level of contestability. Now, we know the last time the government tried to make the vet market a contestable market, we had a lot of rorting going on. So we'll have to see what that actually means when it's delivered on the ground, but hopefully they can pick some providers that are in the system for the right reasons. And then I guess the last dot point in the heads of agreement from a key objectives perspective is increasing the real investment in vet. We've certainly seen at the state and Commonwealth levels, the total investment in this space hasn't really grown over the last 20 years. From a group training perspective, it certainly hasn't grown over the last 20 years. So it's good to see the Commonwealth put those key objectives on the table to say, well, let's, if we're going to make an investment in this space, these are the things we want to cover off on. We want to get all the states to sign up onto it, and then hopefully we can have an improved and better system coming out of COVID-19. All right. My next topic is looking at it from a Victorian Government perspective, and again, it's been a fairly busy 12 months. Most of you would have been involved at some level with the Jenny Macklin Vet Review, which commenced, would have been back in about March. I know she did a webinar for our members sometime in April, and that review closed recently. We're expecting the recommendations to come out sometime over the next sort of 10 weeks. And it'll be interesting to see if they line up with the Commonwealth's objectives that we've just gone through, and to see what some of the priorities are the Victorian Government want to have coming out of COVID-19. We're also going to see a state budget in the second week of October. I think a state and Commonwealth budgets are going to occur in October this year. They're not going to be pretty. We're going to have significant deficits. I think both levels of government have acknowledged that we need to have that to preserve business at the levels that we've got, and to hopefully spend money over the next 2 to 3 years to actually come back out the other side of COVID-19 and make sure that we've really got on top of that unemployment issue that we've currently got. From a Victorian Government perspective, we've also been talking to the government, and I now did a review on apprentices and their participation in the major project skills guarantee, and I would expect some recommendations to come out of that over the coming months as well. And the other thing from a Victorian Government perspective that we really now need to start to focus on is our current GTO funding agreement finishes in July next year, which sounds a long way away, but again, we're only talking about 9 months. So how do we get the government to start thinking about a new funding agreement for our sector? What can we put forward as ideas for increased job creation? And, you know, obviously the current level of funding has never changed for the past 20 years. So again, how do we actually start a conversation about improving that for the sector overall? There's been a number of reviews on group training over the last couple of years, and all of those reviews have consistently shown that group training has been performing better than direct employment. We have stronger completion rates, and we have stronger commencement rates with all the disadvantaged job seeker cohorts. So again, I think that's been acknowledged by government. Now, I guess the challenge for us is how do we actually continue that conversation with governments and get increased funding for our sector. So with that, we're really keen for members to start to think about, well, what are some of the case studies and good news examples that we've got out there, and how do we start to engage government with some of those stories so we can make sure that group training is always at the front of their mind when we're going over the next few months when we're coming out of COVID-19. The other major piece of work we did for the year, obviously, was the Macklin review, as we discussed. Things like completion rates, commencement rates, youth engagement, school to work transitions, and that GTOs understand the complex individual, community and business needs were some of the platforms that we raised in our response to that paper. People can download our version of that document from our website. I think it's about 40 odd pages, but we did try to go in a fair bit of detail in terms of highlighting and showcasing why group training companies are good in those 5 areas that we've just spoken about. Some of the other challenges we've covered in the report, obviously the Victorian Labour Hire Authority and the requirement for GTOs to register. We're not overly thrilled about that situation and would like to be regulated by VRQA and VRQA only, and we'd like that to be acknowledged in the Education Act. So we need to have a look at how that could be upgraded at some stage. The major project skills guarantees and the Local Jobs First Act, we think they're great initiatives, but certainly we don't think that we've seen a 10% increase in the number of apprentices and trainees on major project building sites. So while the initiative's great, we'd certainly like to see how that's policed and how do we actually get group training involved in those programs a little bit more closely and actually get more apprenticeship and traineeship outcomes. One of the other things we'd like to do with increased funding is obviously improve some of our data collection. So things like rotations, size of host employers. We know we've asked members for some of that data in the past, which has been great. But again, I think some of that data is difficult for the government to actually see. So how do we capture that on a more regular basis, and governments can start to measure the true value of group training companies, especially around rotations, which is an unseen activity. And from the last statistic we gave government, it was almost every single apprentice over that 3-year period gets rotated at least once. And in the electrical industry, almost every apprentice gets rotated annually. So that's a significant amount of work for the GTOs to do to keep young people in their apprenticeship. And then certainly in times like we are experiencing now, rotations and suspensions and handbacks are higher than they've ever been. So, you know, we can acknowledge that group training does this really well, but we actually don't get funded for any of that. So again, that's some of the conversation we'd like to continue with government going forward. And then some of our more specific, I guess, asks around COVID. So, you know, how do we actually have a concerted effort around youth employment programs? How do we start to look at supporting businesses and their workforce development needs at a local and a regional and an industry specific level when we're coming out of COVID-19? And then how do we actually start to build real partnerships that are led by industry and employers and are creating skilled job opportunities for young people? And then I guess the other issue that I think a lot of you would be aware of is how do we start to support 2020 school leavers? We've got reasonably good completion rates at the moment, but we've got quite a number of apprentices and trainees that have been handed back or in some form of informal suspension. But we're also about to have another wave of school leavers hit the employment market late this year, early next year. We've got unemployment sitting at around 10%. Youth unemployment's probably double that. So I think there's going to be a real need to have additional programs in this space to try and get youth unemployment back under control. When we have a look at the effects of COVID-19 on the group training sector, members have been providing data now since the first week of April. You can see there that there's a sharp rise in the number of apprentices and trainees that were handed back on the first week of August when Metropolitan Melbourne went into stage 4 restrictions and regional Victoria went into stage 3. So collectively at the moment, our members are trying to support, you know, close to 1,000 apprentices and trainees that actually aren't working, in their regular sense that they normally would be. So that's a fairly significant number in a fairly compressed period of time, which we've got, you know, a lot of young people there that may be a bit anxious about that. Hopefully we can keep them motivated enough, and hopefully we come out of stage 4 quick enough that we can get them all back into meaningful employment. When we have a look at the breakdown of the data a little bit more closely, when we look at it by industry here, I know this slide may be a little hard to read, but you'll get copies of this, but the automotive industry, the construction sector, which includes carpentry and plumbing, and the electrical sector and business services are probably the 4 most hardest hit sectors. Certainly a large spike since we've seen stage 4 restrictions in Metropolitan Melbourne. When we have a look at just the rough numbers that have been handed back over the last couple of weeks, so we've had about 600 and around about 430 on suspension. We've had a small number that have been cancelled, and we've had just about every school-based apprentice affected as well. So we know these numbers aren't great. We're hoping it's just a temporary thing, and we're hoping in the next few weeks we can come back out of stage 4 restrictions and go back to some level of normal, whatever normal means these days. When we have a look at the regional areas where these things have been affected, Metropolitan Melbourne has certainly been more affected than the regional areas. You can see the blue bars on the second chart there. Metropolitan Melbourne is by far the biggest area that's affected, followed by Hume, Latrobe, and then the Geelong regions. But compared to Metro Melbourne, we're certainly only seeing around about 10% of the effect in the regional areas, which is some really good news at this stage. One of the things the Victorian Government did announce when we entered into COVID lockdowns a couple of months ago was how do we actually start a retrenched apprentices and trainees program. the Department of Education and Training were great. They got on the front foot with this program and gave the association some funding initially until December this year. We've had close now to 400 participants register in the system. I think we've got about 250 or 300 active participants. I think we've got about 14 GTOs that are participating in the program. And I think we've had about 32 employment outcomes to date, which is great. We know the environment's tough right at the moment, but we've certainly had quite a few GTOs that have been active in that space, which is fantastic. We've also had quite a few job vacancies registered. So hopefully over the next few months, we see that some of those job vacancies, apprentices and trainees will be able to get back into a job if they've totally lost it. And the ones that are just in that temporary suspension can go back to their existing host employers would be fantastic. It's interesting to see with this program, which is covering all apprentices and trainees, not just group training, that the data seems to be matching what we're seeing from a group training perspective. So the occupations most affected are electrical, followed by plumbing, followed by carpentry, then hospitality, chefs, hair and beauty, welding, and so on. So a very similar trend to what we're seeing specifically in group training. We expect the government to make an announcement shortly with the minister about extending this program into 2021, but as soon as we have that officially for you all, we'll certainly let you know. But again, we think with an extension of the program, we may be able to find ways to support more people in this program, and also to support third and fourth year apprentices a little bit more specifically. If they can't get back into work, how we may be able to support them by finishing their qualification. So again, thank you to the 14 GTOs that are participating. We're still happy to take more people on board to support the program. We can give you more information on our website there, which is shown on the screen. The next topic I wanted to cover was the national GTO standards, and a lot of you would be aware that GTOs are required to do a self-assessment each year. I know Simon was on this morning from VRQA's perspective. He didn't really touch specifically around group training audit results, but I think he will at our upcoming GTO managers meeting on the 9th of September. But this is a snapshot of some of the results from the self-assessment. So this is not VRQA's results. These are the results of how GTOs, when they're doing their own self-assessment, how they think they're compliant against those standards. The most recent year is the yellow charts, and overall we're saying we're around about 98% compliant, which is certainly improved from when we first started this back in 2016. We were probably saying that GTOs were 93, 94% compliant. These results are from 28 organisations, so they're not all registered GTOs. There's some organisations in there that may potentially try and register to become a GTO in the future, but they've undertaken the self-assessment so far. The results have been fairly consistent over the last 3 years. And when we break it down against the actual individual standards, you can see there, standard 1, 98%, standard 2, 99, standard 3, 98. And then when we have an actual breakdown of the actual individual standards, you can see all of them there. There's one that probably highlights that GTOs need to do a little bit more work in this space, and it's probably not the easiest thing to show in an audit process, but standard 3.6, which talks about the principles of access and equity, and how do you actually promote those principles of access and equity when you're looking at your marketing, your recruitment, your monitoring, your support, your governance, and your administration. So that 3.6 standard has been fairly consistent with the network for a number of years as probably one of the hardest things for us to show. We know there's some issues when you're trying to advertise for a job, for example. You can't actually advertise for a job and say that you only want to attract women or Indigenous unless you can get a special consideration and an exemption from VCAT around that, because you may be breaking discrimination laws. So again, some of these things are not necessarily as easy to do when you're trying to show an auditor how you promote and market programs to a specific cohort. So we understand why it's at 92, but again, as a group, I think we've improved on that standard over the last few years. And again, I'm keen to see what best practice would look like in that space going forward. And I know VRQA will provide a little bit more detail on the site audits that they did for the 5 GTOs that have been completed over 2019. And I think that will be good information for the 5 GTOs that are doing their site audits in the latter half of this year. The last topic I wanted to touch on was the Victorian manslaughter legislation. And I know I've given this presentation to the OHS network in the past. And I know we've provided the information to a couple of boards and CEOs. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it. And again, this information's there for you to pass on to a lot of your staff, but there was a lot of media and publicity around the changes to the workplace manslaughter laws and the act that was introduced on the 1st of July. I guess from a WorkSafe perspective, the law's there designed to strengthen workplace safety. It aims to prevent workplace death, and it's there to provide a strong deterrent to officers, organisations and employers to make sure that they comply with their OHS obligations. And it will certainly increase or make tougher penalties where a workplace death occurs. And the thing I think we really need to highlight there is a workplace death that is caused by criminal negligence. So in terms of if it's a negligent act by someone, or someone deliberately went out of their way to put someone in harm, I think all of us would agree that's certainly not the right thing to do, and people should be penalised for that. The summary of the slides I've got was from a presentation and information provided from WorkSafe, and the link to that presentation is on the slide there. So first of all, I think just giving you a quick snapshot, in Victoria, we have around about 27,000 claims to work cover each year from an injured worker. That's a significant number. Last year, there was 24 workplace fatalities, Victorians that have died as a result of a workplace incident. And there's certainly been quite a number of people that have been affected by either an injury or a death in the workplace. When we have a look at the group training network specifically, we have more than 200 notifiable incidences each year. In 2019, we had 391. And we've actually had some deaths within the group training sector over the last 10 years. So there was one in Victoria in 2018. It was an apprentice who entered a confined space. We've had a serious disability and an injury from a fall from heights in Victoria in 2016. And we've had a death by electrocution in Queensland, and we've had one in South Australia in 2012. So we're certainly not immune to this space. And when you look at the 391 notifiable incidences, even though a vast majority of them will be what we would classify minor, it is certainly still putting a young person in harm's way at some degree and at some level. And again, when we're dealing with young people, we know that constant reinforcement of these messages is really important. When we have a look at the offence and the wording of the offence, something that you really need to be mindful of is the changes to the Act actually do not create any additional duties from an employer perspective. So there's nothing more that you have to do in this Act compared to what you're already having to do prior to that. And I know we've spent a lot of time and effort with the network around supporting them with policies, procedures and training materials in this space. But the Act itself only changes the penalties and the laws if someone's breaching the Act. It doesn't actually create any additional duties for anyone. And when we have a look at the actual specific wording, the stuff that I've highlighted in red is probably the most critical there, but employers and officers and others who are already complying and who continue to comply with their existing OH&S obligations cannot be charged with workplace manslaughter. What the new laws do make is the consequences for a serious breach of those duties much more severe. So if you're already complying to the Act, you probably won't be charged with workplace manslaughter, I guess is where the Act is going. And this is where the last sentence becomes critical. So again, it's how do you actually prove this? So each of the duties required under the relevant legislation talks about a duty as far as reasonably practicable. So what does, as far as reasonably practicable means? I'm not a lawyer, but we have a definition from WorkSafe, and that's probably the best point to start at. I'll get to that in a second, but before we get that, so the Act actually describes what negligent conduct means, and for the purposes of the Workplace Manslaughter Act, it involves a great falling short of the standard of care that is reasonable, that a reasonable person would have taken in the circumstances, and it's a high risk of death, serious injury, or serious illness. It's a failure to act is also a negligent conduct. So if you don't adequately manage, control, or supervise the employees, or you do not take reasonable action to fix a dangerous situation, is also classified as a negligent act. So as we said earlier, right at the beginning, the penalties can be reasonably severe, maximum of 25 years imprisonment and a maximum of fine of $16.5 million for incorporated bodies. So the penalties have certainly ramped up in this space. The normal investigation and legal processes would continue in line with the current arrangements with WorkSafe. They have carriage of the workplace manslaughter matter until the accused person has been committed to stand trial, and then once it goes to the court systems, WorkSafe would defend their position from that perspective. When we look at what is reasonably practicable, the summary I've given you there is word for word what's taken from the WorkSafe Victoria website. They do have a PDF that explains reasonably practicable and how it applies to the law. The current document was dated 2007 to 11. I would expect them to sometime this year or next year potentially update this document, but this is the current version that's live. And I guess when we're looking at what is reasonably practicable, so there's a couple of things there that WorkSafe will do in terms of their test. So the first one is the organisation or the duty holders, are they committed to providing the highest level of protection for people against risks to their health and safety? So if you can prove that you're committed to that, then you'd be safe. The second point would be, are you proactive in taking measures to protect the health and safety of people? So again, making sure that you're constantly reviewing and updating and providing ongoing information and support to make sure that people continue to be in a safe environment, not just on day one when they start. So they're the two tests WorkSafe will cover, and then from there they'll weigh up each of those matters against 2 points. So the first point is they'll weigh up that matter against what was the likelihood of the hazard or the risk concerned. The greater the likelihood of the hazard eventuating, the greater the significance this factor will play when weighing up all matters taken into account as to determine what was reasonably practicable. So again, you'll have to show that you've done some sort of assessment that this hazard is of a high risk and it's highly likely that it could happen, or that it's a risk that is still high, but we're managing it and it may be quite low in terms of the risk of it happening. Again, you have to show that you've got some way of determining that level of hazard. And then the second part of that is what degree of harm would the individual be in from the result of that hazard. So again, you need to weigh up what is the potential risk and harm for that individual if you're putting them into that situation. So again, we know that's open to interpretation, but from the WorkSafe's perspective, that's their, I guess, description of how they determine what is reasonably practicable. And from a GTO perspective, you need to be able to show for all the risks and all the hazards and all the individuals you work with, how you're actually covering off on those points that we've just discussed. And with that, the association has a whole host of documents that can help you. We have a document called the shared responsibility and what compliance may look like. And this talks about the shared responsibility between the group training organisation and the host employer. And there's obviously a whole range of steps along the way. So there's the recruitment phase, the induction, the placement, the monitoring, the reporting and continuous improvement, and then there's obviously incident and accident investigations. So at each one of those steps along the way, there's policies, there's procedures, there's documents that you can download from our website, and it can help you show that you're meeting the compliance from a GTO perspective, and there's documents there that you can help your host employer show that they're meeting their responsibility as well. We know this is a really challenging space for group training. We're dealing with young workers, they're inexperienced. We're relying on host employers to supervise young people. There's certainly a need for ongoing reinforcement for both the host employer and the apprentice. And again, these changes to the Act don't mean that host employers get off scot-free. So if the GTO's done the right thing and the host employer isn't, the changes to the Act could certainly apply to the host employer. So again, happy to share that information with you. We spend a lot of time and effort in our OHS committee updating our policies and providing more information as we go forward. So some of the things that we've got available for you as well is examples of risk assessments where you might be able to look at an activity and say that the consequence of that activity is insignificant or it's minor, right through to its catastrophic, and the likelihood of that activity could be rare or it could be almost certain to occur. And again, if you've got an activity that's almost certain to occur and the consequences is death, that would be an extreme risk. So how do you actually manage that extreme risk is vital on how you actually prove that you're doing this. So risk assessments for job activities and information provided back to hosts and apprentices and reviewed actively is certainly something that we would like. We obviously benchmark and review our incidents, and we're certainly keen for feedback from members on refinement and improvements to the information that we provide everyone. One of the things that we do is our annual benchmarking, and I've only just got a couple of quick snapshots of this, but the full report again is on our members site of our website. We've been benchmarking OHS data now for about 7 years. The results have been very consistent over that time. 2019 saw a slight spike in the number of incidences reported, and it's about 2.24% of our workforce that have a reportable incident, which is still relatively small, but compared to the wider workforce, we're dealing with young males predominantly. Our percentage is higher than the average when you look at the full spectrum of employers from 15 to 65. Our lost time injury frequency rate for 2019 was for every 1 million hours that were worked by apprentices, there was 13.4 injuries or incidences that were reported. So again, that's just reflecting that we've had a slight spike last year compared to the previous 2 years. When we have a look at who's been injured and how they're being injured, it's been the same for the last 7 years. So first year apprentices are by far the greatest at risk of getting injured. They're usually between 15 and 25 years of age. And then when we have a look at the types of injuries, they're having foreign objects in the eyes, they're having lacerations to the hand, and then they're having sprains and strains to the arm, back, hand, and leg. So when we have a quick snapshot of those incidents, foreign objects in the eyes, we could have some PPE with safety glasses. Lacerations to the hands, again, that could be unavoidable in some circumstances, but in some cases they could be wearing gloves. And sprains and strains could be linked to manual lifting. So again, educating our young males that they can't lift 500 kilograms or 200 kilograms above their head may help with some of those sprains and strains. So again, when we look at the results as a collective, first year apprentices, sprains and strains, lacerations to the hand and foreign objects in the eye. Second year apprentices, lacerations to the hand, sprains and strains to the back, and then an impact to the hand. Third and fourth year apprentices are a little bit better, lacerations to the hand and sprains and strains to the back. Pre-apprentices have burns to the arm, and trainees have sprains and strains. So again, the data's now been very consistent over 7 years. They're the ways that our young people are getting injured when they're working in group training. One of the things that we have done is produce a whole range of safety videos. We've produced 32 to 3 minute sort of animations. They're all freely available. You can download them from our YouTube channel. You can download them and put them in your own LMS or email them out to people or SMS. But we've got a whole range of different topics in there. And I know we had RMIT to thank for that program. They provided some funding and support. So thanks, Debbie. I think you're on the conference call today.
You're very welcome.
So yeah, with RMIT's support, we were able to produce those safety animations for everyone to use. We think they're really good. They capture the key issues and try and keep someone entertained for 1 or 2 minutes. They're an easy read, and again, we think there's something that's you could send to your apprentices and trainees on a weekly or monthly basis just to reinforce a particular topic. All right. The last couple of topics I wanted to cover was our GTO salary or remuneration survey. So thank you to the GTOs that participated in that. We know it's difficult to get an exact read on what is the remuneration we should be paying our sector, because there's not too many comparisons we can make directly to our sector. We're fairly unique in that perspective. I think we had around about 30 GTOs participate in the survey from around Australia all up. For those individuals and organisations that did participate, you can get a interactive graphic that shows all the results based on a whole range of roles, from directors and CEOs down to field officers and various roles based on your region or your turnover or the size of your GTO. So again, we'd like to continue this as an ongoing exercise, maybe every 2 years. And again, next time we do it, we'd like to see more GTOs participate. All right. My last slide was really just talking about some upcoming events over the next few weeks. So CEOs later today will get an email from me talking about our 2021 to 2023 board terms are open for nominations as of today. There's 2 member elected positions available. One of them's a current vacancy, and the other one is currently held by Darren Webster from Skillinvest. Those nominations will open today and will close on the 14th of September. So if you're interested in nominating to be on our board, you can go through that process. We're also keen to make sure that every CEO completes the nomination form so we know who the nominee is from each company if we ever have to go to a vote, because we've got an AGM coming up. And I know we've had, I think, about 7 new CEOs in the sector in Victoria this year. So we've had quite a number of changes at that level. We're also going to be opening up our industry awards this week. They're going to close late September, maybe the first week of October. Those exact dates will be on our website. We know our awards are scheduled for the 13th of November, along with our AGM. We're not sure what that's going to look like. If we can't hold a fairly substantial face-to-face end-of-year event, we will hold over the presentation of those awards to our luncheon next year. So we certainly want to make sure that the individual apprentices and GTOs and everyone that's up for awards, that they get recognised at a formal event. We can get photos and do all the usual stuff. So at the moment, the awards will open this week. Really keen for people to apply. And again, these are some really good examples that we can show government going forward of, you know, what is the best things that are happening in group training over the last 12 months. With that, I think I'm finished. I've got probably 5 minutes to go before Peter Tressiter starts. I'd just like to thank all of our sponsors once again. Without them, we couldn't run these events and do some of the other stuff that we do throughout the year. So I'd just like to acknowledge all of our partners there and thank them for their support. I'm happy to take a couple of questions if anyone's got any. I haven't seen any pop up in the chat room, but happy to take them either through the chat room or turn your microphone on. Thank you.